manuscripts that are surviving from the early times before the printing press for something ancient. You have more manuscripts. You can be more sure. Oh, you look at all these manuscripts and you can see, well, there's a little difference here, difference there, but we can be more and more sure the more manuscripts we have of what the original said. If you have one copy versus 1,000, the 1,000 you would probably be more certain of knowing that you have what they wrote, because you have a lot of manuscripts to compare. Years before, the distance between the earliest manuscript, say, 0 BC, if the earliest manuscript that survived, now there's other manuscripts in here, but usually pieces of paper, pieces of papyrus, pieces of animal skin, they degrade over time. They don't last for 2,000 years, most of them. So if the earliest one you have is 1,000 AD, copy, and then the earliest copy you have is maybe from 1,000 AD, that's probably less reliable than if you have another document that has written 0 BC and it's from like 200 AD, because this is a shorter time span. So you'd say, wow, okay, we got ones that are earlier than this one, so this one we can trust more than this one. Make sense? Now we have another means of looking at, that's external evidence, which means, do we have anything outside the document? Anybody saying, oh, I know that this guy really wrote this document and he knows what he's talking about? Or do we just have a document, a guy saying, guess what? This is what happened. If you have external evidence, other people writing about this, knowledgeable about that, that's powerful backing for it. If you don't have that, then it's not as reliable. And then the internal evidence. So the point is, are the people who are writing it, do they have the ring of truth? Do they talk about facts? Do they talk about things that can be validated and tested? Are they talking about things, do they match up with other things that we know? It's the internal evidence of reliability. Do the people even writing the document say, hey, guess what? I talked to Joe. Joe was actually there at the scene. He said this to me. Or do they just say, hey, guess what? I think Jesus had 5 wives, and I'm living in 300 AD, and Jesus had 5 wives. And were you there? No, I'm in 300 AD, but I didn't really interview anybody. I just am making this claim. Well, somebody who's like, the internal validity would be, this person is saying, I'm the person who was there, and he's able to describe things that fit that reality. So, if you have any doubts, by the way, if somebody says, hey, guess what? My name's John. I was a disciple of Jesus. You don't automatically say, oh, I don't know. It's in doubt. You got to prove it to me. The benefit always goes to the writer. We don't find something that says, my name is Plato, here's my philosophy, and we say, whoa, I don't know, maybe that's really Joe Blow in Rome writing that thing. Why? Well, he says he's Plato. Unless you have other evidence that clearly demonstrates that this is false and somebody else wrote it, you go with the benefit of the doubt goes to the text. Otherwise, we're going to doubt everything that anybody ever says. So, this is how we go. Number of manuscript copies. There we go. Da, 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 da. Well, here you go. Anybody read about Caesar or learned about Caesar at all? Or say ancient Greece, that's Thucydides. Herodotus, he was a Roman historian, so is Tacitus. Demosthenes is a Greek writer, mostly plays and stuff. And you can see the number of manuscript copies that we have, period. Only 10. But nobody in the Roman history department at SUNY is going to question and doubt that we know about what happened in the Roman Empire from these documents. But there's only 10 of them. I didn't know that. There's only 10. Before the printing press, only 10 survived. 8, 20, 200. So the one that has the most next to the New Testament documents is the Iliad, Homer's story of Odysseus on his journeys. And that has 643 that have survived. But the New Testament has, depending on how you count them, about 25,000. Yes.
Why were people making more manuscript copies? Because like the original ones were decaying, or to spread them to other regions?
Well,
Like what's the purpose?
Well, until the printing press, you have 1,500 years.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, people would make a copy.
to like spread them around.
To spread them around, people in different cities.
Weren't there a lot of monasteries? That's what their whole goal was, just to duplicate?
Yeah, there were people who made copies. But even if these other documents, why do we have more than one copy of a book? You know, you have different people having them in different places, different libraries. They're disseminating the information. That's why there would be different copies. But it wasn't so easy back then. It wasn't like you take a plate, make a plate, print it in the press, you know, make 1,000 newspaper copies. It was very difficult back then. Actually, books and documents and scrolls were very expensive. Somebody had to get the papyrus, which was difficult to make and expensive, or the animal skin that was rewritten on, and the materials, they were expensive, and then somebody had to carefully copy it all by hand and make sure it was accurate. They were very expensive. It wasn't like a paperback, oh, a paperback, I'm done with it, you know, chuck it. Let me get one for $5, right? It wasn't like that. It was very expensive. It was almost like, you know, owning a car or something. So that's why even some manuscripts did survive, because people took very good care of them. And actually, there's a good movie out called Fragments of Truth that came out like last year. If you want to see it, it's really interesting. But they show that in this place in Egypt where there's a big dump, people would throw all their stuff over, I don't know, 500, 1,000 years. They would just discard their junk there. And they found, the interesting thing, what they found in there is pieces of documents in the layers where you knew that was all the pottery and all the things that were in there. You knew that that was from, like, say, 400 AD. And then you would see documents in there that would be from 200 or 150 AD. And you knew by the style of writing and the material they're written on, the way they do that scientifically, you know, knowing when it was written, you know that those documents were thrown out after 200, maybe even 300 years. So that shows that people didn't just have a document and chuck it. Those were, you know, precious materials. So I'm going to show you something very interesting later, because people kept documents for hundreds of years because they were so valuable. Now, there you go. Time between. So this is the second test. So you can see that the earliest copy of Plato, you know, we've heard about Plato, people reading his philosophies. Nobody doubts this is what Plato wrote and this is his philosophy. But guess what? The earliest copy of Plato, I think he wrote 400 years before Christ or so. So this means like 800 or 900 AD is the earliest copy of Plato that we have discovered. So the earliest copy of Plato that we have, and when he wrote, is 1,300 years. But do you hear anybody doubting that we have what Plato wrote? Nobody says anything. Caesar's history of his wars, 1,000 years. The Iliad is probably the closest, maybe 400 years we have any partial copies of the Iliad. And Livy, we have about 400 years. But for the New Testament, it's within 50 years. Actually, we have early pieces of documents that are within 50 or 100 years of when they were written. So if you're going to rely on anything as trustworthy, which one is the most trustworthy here? The New Testament. So it blows everything away in all those respects on those tests. Now here's just and you can, I have copies of this for you, you don't have to go through it, but I'm just showing when it's written, the earliest copies, the time gap, and the number of copies you have, okay? Actually, this is wrong. Josephus, that should be like about 12, not 120. You know, Josephus, everybody likes Josephus, History of the Jews, 1,000 pages, but you know, even go on Wikipedia and have a look at it, you'll see how many actually manuscripts there are. It's only maybe a dozen. And you can see they're actually 1,300 years. I'm sorry, where is Josephus, 900 years after he actually lived, are these copies. So if you're going to trust anything, you're going to trust the New Testament. So I put a few things in there, 50 to 100 AD, you got fragments, you got about 90 of them that are within 50 years of when it was written. You've got 200 books, whole books of the Bible, like within 100 years of when it's written. You've got 250 complete, most of the New Testament, and within 225 years, you have complete entire New Testament. So everything that's listed right down here now is better than any one of any of the others. 5366 are all better than every single thing up there from the other documents in the classical world. So, let's see. There's the Codex Sinaiticus. That's dated 325 AD. It's called Sinaiticus because it was discovered on the Sinai. You can look this up on Wikipedia or Google. It's kind of an interesting story. This guy's going down there investigating, and he finds these guys throwing these documents for heating in their monastery or whatever in Sinai, and it's like, whoa, what's this? This is pretty incredible. And he grabs some of them, and he finds out that this is a complete copy of the Bible from 325 AD. So it's a complete copy. You can see this in the British Museum in England, in London. I've seen it. It's pretty interesting. Just go, you can look at it. It's actually pretty reasonably well preserved.
Is that the New Testament or the whole Bible?
This is, I believe this is the whole Bible. So this is the New Testament. Sorry, this is the New Testament.
Were you actually able